It's no surprise that a healthy number of shooting games would see release to the Sega Dreamcast. Though it's not on the level of the TurboGrafx-16 or the Sega Saturn, the Dreamcast does have a high concentration of quality shmups and borderliners, and even some legendary titles of its own. And we're taking a look at all of them. Welcome to Bullet Heaven STG Chronicles, the shmups of Sega Dreamcast. We're not the only ones to think that the Sega Dreamcast is pretty special. It was a console that really stood out at the time of its release, but whose life was cut tragically short due to a number of factors. First released in Japan back in November 1998, with a Western release just a year later in 1999, the Dreamcast would unceremoniously be discontinued in 2001. The final game to see released to the Dreamcast in North America was NHL 2K2 in 2002. Despite this, Japan saw a much longer timeline for official Dreamcast releases than North America did, with the platform's final official release, Karos, dropping in 2007, a year after the PlayStation 3 was released. And that's not even really where it ends. New games are being produced for the Dreamcast all the time, with new ones that have yet to be released. Best of all, most of these are shooting games, which is great for us. Let's take a look at the system itself, as well as how we're going to capture footage for this project. The Dreamcast was a 6th generation game console that was derived from Naomi arcade hardware. It was also known in development as Doral and Katana. It sported a 200 MHz processor, 16 MB of RAM, 8 MB of video RAM, and 2 MB of audio memory. It was also pretty small for its time, at 19 by 19.5 by 7.5 centimeters. Despite this small size, it was actually a very dense system too, weighing in at about 1.5 kilograms, or 3.3 pounds. Unlike the contemporary PlayStation and eventually the PlayStation 2, it also had 4 controller ports to facilitate 4-player games without the need for a multitap. With a maximum resolution of 640 by 480, the Dreamcast could also output via VGA through its multi-AV out. The Dreamcast was also a trailblazer for online gaming, featuring a built-in dial-up modem adapter. A broadband version was also made available later on. The Dreamcast also used a pretty revolutionary save medium known as the VMU, or Visual Memory Unit. Codenamed Potato, it incorporated its own screen, inputs, and battery power source, which allowed players to manage files, play minigames, and more. 2 VMUs could even be connected together to independently transfer files between them. The VMU predated Sony's Pocket Station by about half a year. It held 200 blocks of game data, which was taken up at different rates by different games. Naturally, minigames would take up a much larger chunk of this memory. Finally, the Dreamcast was also notable for having interface with SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color using a special cable. Information was transferred between select games in a way that wasn't totally dissimilar to Nintendo's GameCube to Game Boy Advance connectivity, which happened years later. Now for some numbers that mean something for this particular series. Not counting light gun games, first-person shooters, and space combat simulators, the Dreamcast currently has a library of 43 shmups, borderliners, and compilations that we're considering for this series. It's also possible that 3 more will see release by the end of 2019, rounding out the library to 46 titles. It's a substantial amount, and it makes the Dreamcast a very viable system for players only into shooting games to amass quite a solid library on shooting games alone. So, how will we go about capturing them? Well, the Sega Dreamcast has a number of different output methods, both officially and in the aftermarket. Believe it or not, there was a time where all we had at our disposal was RF out. This is basically Dreamcast garbage tier imagery, and thankfully, for the sake of our audience, we can't even really capture RF footage these days anyways, so we aren't going to bother. Now, AV Composite is a vast improvement, but still pretty trash. Using Composite is passable on a CRT television, but for anything else, even with equipment like the Micom Soft FrameMeister, the Dreamcast imagery is blurry and chunky. S-Video is a good step up though. With some games that run in 240p, S-Video is a great way to get solid upscaling out of the FrameMeister, especially with games like King of Fighters 1999 Dream Match and Psychic Force 2012. However, if a game runs in 480i, it tends to be a little blurry, like Bang.io. Some games such as Bang.io will only run in RF, Composite, or S-Video, and not VGA, making S-Video the best way to play these games specifically. Well, without modification anyway. Which brings us to the aforementioned VGA. Sega sold an official VGA box, but official units are going for completely obscene amounts these days. However, a number of third-party units do the job equally well. Most VGA boxes also incorporate composite and S-video outputs as well, allowing for most older sets to get the best picture quality available depending on the set. We obtained a demo-load DC to VGA unit from Japan, and it works just as well as the Sega Dreamcast branded one, with the added benefit of dual aux out and a volume roller for its audio out. This is helpful for keeping the Dreamcast volume from getting distorted at higher volume levels. But we think we can do better. After contacting several aftermarket manufacturers such as Pound and Retro Bit, BBS Artisanal Retro Modding got back to us with what could easily be the best modern solution for Dreamcast video out at a great price. The BBS Toro is a handcrafted VGA box with a ton of great features. It has RCA audio out, SCART support, a 15 kHz RGB to 31 kHz VGA switch, and a scanline generator with both thin and wide scanline thickness options. For those that are a little more technically minded, it even has a hidden C-Sync switch for RGB through devices like the FrameMeister in compatible games. The Toro comes bundled with a braided Dreamcast to 10-pin connector cable which fits snugly into the unit. From there, players need only connect the Dreamcast end into their system and power it on. A brilliant blue LED illuminates the internals of the Toro, revealing a laser-etched Toro logo when the system is on. We have to admit, it looks pretty slick. Being that these units are handcrafted, it's not a total surprise that nothing else was included, not even an instruction sheet, but they are available for download on the Bahar Brothers website. The Toro is a top-quality product, and as such, it produces some top-quality imagery and sound. The RCA support means that players can use incredibly high-quality cables to get the best, cleanest analog sound possible on the Dreamcast, especially if heavy, shielded cables with gold-plated contacts can be used. My converter makes for an easy, clear upscale that is readily accepted in devices like the FrameMeister for a one-to-one pass-through with sub-negligible lag. All that's really needed is a monitor with a snappy response time. Needless to say, the Toro is a fantastic device, but we think we can do even better. If sheer clarity for both sound and visuals is important, look no further than the BBS Gecko. The Gecko is very similar to BBS's other HDMI device, the Akura, which incorporates the same scanlining as the Toro. We don't use scanlining though, so the Gecko is a great fit. It's small and elegant, and the Gecko converts the VGA signal from the Dreamcast into an HDMI signal, producing the absolute clearest video and sound that players can get out of their Dreamcasts. The Gecko also comes with the same connector cable as the Toro, and it hooks up exactly the same way. However, since it's an HDMI device, only one cable is required for pure digital sound and imagery. It too also lights up when powered on just like the Toro, revealing a laser-etched Gecko logo. The sound in particular is not only well amplified, but also devoid of any buzzing or interference, which is common on many VGA boxes using a 3.5mm aux-based audio system. Some fiddling with the FrameMeister will be needed to get the image fields to play nice, and the image is shifted just a tad to the right, but on the whole it works spectacularly. Just look at Under Defeat. Both of these options work extremely well for capturing incredible imagery from the Dreamcast at a very affordable price. The Toro will run players about $80, while the Gecko is only $55, and both produce arguably better results than even the official Dreamcast VGA box. Again, some non-VGA compatible games like Bangai-O will not work with these devices. There are instructions by which to trick the Dreamcast into outputting an RGB signal through the VGA cable, but it's not really well explained and it feels kind of risky, so for now, it's just S-video for us. One other thing to note, the signals that come out of the Toro and the Gecko are not upscaled and will typically be stretched out by 16:9 displays. Be sure to set your monitor to 4:3 unless a 16:9 option exists in the game being played. In the case of our VGA upscaler and with the Gecko, the FrameMeister is required to force the signal into a 4:3 aspect ratio when recording. It was just the easiest way. Of course, with a bit of technical know-how, that's no issue at all. As such, we love the Toro and the Gecko, and we can't recommend it enough. These devices will officially be how we capture our Dreamcast footage for this series and beyond. And of course, for their price, the BBS lineup for Dreamcast is absolutely worth their weight in gold. no modern Dreamcast player should be without.